Jamal Rudd's fist came down on the kitchen counter so hard the coffee mug jumped cracked and bled black coffee across the morning paper. "Get out!" he roared at Sarah, his voice splitting the house in two. The front door slammed. And then silence. A silence so loud it hurt his ears. But underneath that silence, somewhere down the hallway, a woman was humming. Soft, steady. The same melody he'd heard for 4 years and never once truly listened to. His knees buckled. Because in that single broken second, Jamal realized the woman he'd been pushing away wasn't the one who just walked out the door, she was the one who had never left. Before we go further, drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled tonight. And if stories about second chances, quiet love, and the people we almost lose move you the way they move me, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because what happens next? You won't believe a man could be this blind for this long. The cracked mug kept bleeding coffee across the counter, and Jamal Rudd just stood there watching it, like a man watching his own life leak out, drop by drop. His knuckles still throbbed, his chest still heaved. And somewhere on the other side of that slammed front door, Sarah's heels were clicking down the driveway fast and final the way a woman walks when she's really done with a man. "Jamal, you're impossible," she'd screamed before the door blew shut. 3 months I've been trying. 3 months. And you can't even look at me when I'm talking?" He hadn't answered her. That was the worst part. He hadn't even tried. He'd just stood there with his jaw locked, staring past her shoulder toward the hallway, where the humming had started up again, that low, sweet, tuneless melody Ella always made when she was folding laundry, or sorting Ben's school papers, or doing one of the 1,000 invisible things she did to keep his house from falling apart at the seams. Sarah had caught him doing it. Caught his eyes drifting. "You're not even here, Jamal," she'd whispered. And then louder, "You know what I'm done." Now the house was empty of her, and full of something else. Jamal pressed both palms flat on the counter and dropped his head between his shoulders. 56 years old. A grown man. A father. A widower for almost 5 years now. And here he was, standing in his own kitchen at 9:30 in the morning, breathing like he'd just run a mile, because a woman he barely loved had walked out of his life. That wasn't the part that scared him. The part that scared him was the relief. "Daddy." He froze. Ben was standing in the kitchen doorway in his Spider-Man pajamas, hair sticking up in 3 directions, holding a half-eaten piece of toast. 8 years old, and already too smart for his own good. Already watching his father the way his father used to watch his father, careful, quiet, calculating. "Hey, buddy." Jamal forced his voice steady. "You're up early. I heard yelling." "Yeah, I'm sorry about that." "Was that Miss Sarah?" It was. "Is she coming back?" Jamal opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "No, son, I don't think she is." Ben chewed his toast, slowly thinking. Then he shrugged one shoulder, a small, casual, devastating little shrug, and said, "That's okay. I didn't really like her anyway." And then he turned and padded back down the hallway toward the humming. Jamal stood there alone in the kitchen with the cracked mug and the bleeding coffee and the ringing silence in his ears, and he thought, my 8-year-old son just had a clearer read on my life than I do. He needed air. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the back door, and that's when he saw the note. Tucked into the pocket. Folded in half. Her handwriting neat and small. "Jamal, Ben has a field trip permission slip due Monday. Signed it for you. Also, the dishwasher is leaking again. Called the repair guy. He's coming Tuesday at 10. I won't be in the house meeting downtown, but the spare key is where it always is. E." He read it twice, then a third time, and on the third read, something in his throat went tight. 4 years. 4 years of these notes. 4 years of permission slips signed repair guys called spare keys, placed exactly where they always were. 4 years of a woman quietly running every corner of his life so he could grieve and rebuild and date and fail at dating and grieve some more, and he had never once, not once, sat down and asked himself what it cost her to do it. He folded the note back into his pocket, and the humming kept going down the hall. He found her in the laundry room. Ella was seated in her wheelchair beside the dryer, pulling warm clothes out one by one, folding them on her lap, with that particular slow precision. She had the kind that came from a body that had learned painfully that nothing could be rushed. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her glasses had slid halfway down her nose. And she was humming that song, the one without words, the one he'd never asked the name of. She looked up when he stepped into the doorway, and her humming stopped. "Morning," she said. "Morning. Ben tell you about the field trip?" "He didn't, but you did. Thank you for signing it." "Of course." She turned back to the laundry, folded a small t-shirt into a perfect square. "I didn't mean to overhear. Earlier. I'm sorry." "You didn't overhear. You live here." "I work here, Jamal." "Ella, it's fine." She kept folding. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. "Sarah's a nice woman. I'm sure you two will figure it out." "We won't." She paused, just for a second, the smallest of pauses. Then she set the folded shirt on the stack and reached for the next one. "That's a shame." "Is it?" he heard himself ask. She didn't look up. "Jamal," she said quietly, "don't." "Don't what?" "Don't come down here at 9:30 in the morning, right after a woman walked out of your kitchen, and ask me a question like that. It isn't fair to either one of us." He took a step backward like she'd slapped him. She kept folding. Hung. He walked out the back door without his jacket and stood on the porch in the cold spring air with his chest pounding, and that's where Hattie found him. Hattie was 62, widowed sharp as a paring knife, and lived on the other side of the hedge. She had been married to a man for 38 years, and when he died, she'd cried for 1 week and then signed up for a watercolor class. And in Jamal's experience, there was nothing on God's green earth that woman couldn't see straight through. "I heard the door slam from my kitchen," she said, leaning on the porch rail. "Figured I'd come see whose funeral I was attending." "It's not funny, Hattie." "I didn't say it was." He scrubbed his hand over his face. "Sarah left." "For good, I think." "You're not surprised." "Honey, the only person on this block who is surprised by that is you." He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her. "What does that mean?" Hattie tilted her head. Her gray hair caught the morning sun. "Jamal Rudd," she said, slow and deliberate. "How long has Ella been working in that house?" 4 years next month. "And how long since Marcus passed?" His jaw tightened at his late wife's name. "Almost 5. So Ella came when?" 8 months after the funeral. Ben was 4. I couldn't." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I couldn't do it. The school stuff, the meals, the bedtimes. I was drinking. I was a mess. My sister found her through a service that places caregivers in homes with kids. Said she'd done a few months and gone back to her own work." Her own work being? "She runs a software company. CEO. Hired 40-some people. Works from the home office down the hall when she's not downtown." Hattie raised one eyebrow so high it practically left her face. "And what exactly," she said, "do you think a 41-year-old CEO of a software company is doing folding your son's underwear in a laundry room 4 years after she was supposed to leave?" Jamal opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Said Hattie. "That's what I thought." He didn't go back inside for almost an hour. When he finally did, the laundry was folded and stacked on the counter in 3 neat piles. His Ben's, hers, and Ella was at the kitchen table with her laptop open on a video call with what sounded like her chief operating officer, her voice low and clipped and utterly in command. He'd heard her in this mode 100 times and never really listened. He listened now. "No, John, I told you Tuesday. The Tuesday number is firm. If Brennan's team can't deliver, that's a Brennan problem, not a me problem. I don't care. John, I'll call you back." She closed the laptop, took off her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and for 1/2 second, one fraction of a heartbeat, he saw her. Not the woman who folded his son's laundry, not the quiet hum in the hallway. He saw the whole of her, a woman who ran a company, a woman who had built something, a woman whose body had been rearranged by an accident he had never even asked the details of, and who had somehow still chosen to spend her evenings in his house with his son humming. Ella. Yes. Why are you still here? She looked up at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Excuse me, she said. 4 years. You said when you came it was a 6-month arrangement. A favor for your old colleague at the placement service. You told me that the first day. I remember. You said, 6 months, Mr. Rudd, until you find your feet. And I did find my feet, didn't I? 2 years ago, maybe 3. And you stayed. She set her glasses down on the table. Are you firing me, Jamal? What? No. The word came out too loud. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her hard. No, God no. I'm asking you a question. A real one. I've been asking you fake questions for 4 years, and I'm asking you a real one now. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said, Ben needed someone. Ben has me. Ben needed someone else. Someone who wasn't drowning. That landed in his chest like a stone. And now, he said quieter, is he still drowning? Am I still drowning? No. Then why are you still here? She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of strong tea. He had never noticed that before either. Jamal, she said, if you don't know the answer to that question, then it isn't my job to tell you. She put her glasses back on, opened her laptop, and went back to work. He sat there across from her for another full minute, and then he got up and walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs to his bedroom and shut the door and sat on the edge of the bed he had once shared with his late wife and put his face in his hands. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and went through it year by year. The way a man goes through a box of old letters he should have read a long time ago, year 1. Ella arriving at the door in her wheelchair with a duffel bag on her lap and a calm, level look that said, I am not afraid of your grief, sir, but you will not waste my time with it either. Ben hiding behind his leg. Ella holding out one hand and saying, I'm Ella. I hear you like dinosaurs. I happen to know a lot about dinosaurs. Year 2. Coming home from a brutal day at work to find her at the kitchen table, helping Ben with a science project on the solar system, and Ben, who had not laughed since the funeral, laughing at something she'd said about Pluto. Year 3. The night he'd come home drunk, the last time he'd let himself, and she had been waiting in the living room with a glass of water and a plate of toast, and no judgment in her face at all. Just that quiet, level look, and she'd said, Drink the water, Jamal. Eat the toast. Ben has a math test in the morning and he's going to want his father at breakfast. Year 4. Last week. Standing at the kitchen sink doing dishes because she'd insisted she could do them, and he'd insisted she'd already done enough, and their hands had touched under the running water, and she had pulled hers back like she'd been burned, and he had pretended not to notice. He sat up in the dark. Oh my God, he said out loud to no one. Oh my God. Hattie's voice from the porch that morning. The only person on this block who was surprised by that is you. Ben's voice from the kitchen. I didn't really like her anyway. Ella's voice from the table. If you don't know the answer to that question, then it isn't my job to tell you. He had been in love with her for at least 2 years, maybe 3, maybe from the night with the toast and the water. And he had spent every one of those years dating other women, picking fights with other women, slamming his fist on counters, and frightening other women out of his house, because the truth was sitting at the kitchen table in a wheelchair, humming a song he had never even bothered to learn the name of, and he had been too much of a coward to look it in the eye. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. He stood up. He walked to the bedroom door. And he stopped with his hand on the knob, because somewhere down on the first floor, very faint, he could hear it again, that humming. She was still awake. She was always still awake. He pressed his forehead against the door, and closed his eyes and whispered to the dark, to the house, to the woman, 3 rooms and 4 years away from him. "I see you. I finally see you." And then slowly he turned the knob. He turned the knob, and then he stopped. His hand was on the door, his weight tipped forward, and something in his chest pulled him back hard like a rope around his ribs. What was he going to do? Walk downstairs in his undershirt and sweatpants at 1 in the morning and tell a woman who had every reason in the world to be furious with him that he loved her. After Sarah. After 3 months of dragging another woman around his kitchen, while this one folded his son's laundry in the next room, he let go of the knob. He sat back down on the bed. "You coward," he whispered to himself. "You absolute coward." But he didn't move. Because the truth, the new terrible, freshly unearthed truth was this: he didn't have the right yet. He hadn't earned it. A man didn't get to spend 4 years looking past a woman and then come downstairs in the middle of the night and ask her to forgive him in one conversation. That wasn't love. That was panic dressed up in love's clothes. He lay back down on top of the covers, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until the gray light of morning bled in through the curtains. When Ben came down for breakfast at 7:15, his father was already at the stove making pancakes. Ben stopped in the doorway and squinted at him like he was looking at a stranger. "Dad." "Morning, buddy." "Are you making pancakes?" "I am." "You don't make pancakes. Ella makes pancakes." "Well." Jamal flipped one with the kind of focus a surgeon gives a heart valve. "Today I'm making them." Ben slid onto the stool at the counter, watching his father carefully. "Are you mad at her?" Jamal nearly dropped the spatula. "What, no?" "Ben, no." "Why would you ask me that?" "Because Miss Sarah left, and now you're making pancakes, and you only do weird stuff when something's wrong." Jamal set down the spatula, wiped his hands on a dish towel, came around the counter, and crouched down to his son's eye level. Not easy at 56, but he did it. "Hey, look at me." Ben looked. "Nothing is wrong with Ella. Nothing is wrong with us. I'm making pancakes because I should have been making them a long time ago, and I'm sorry I haven't been." "Okay." Ben considered this. "Okay," he said. Then, after a pause, "Are they going to be good?" "Probably not." "Okay." And the boy reached for the syrup. Ella came into the kitchen 10 minutes later, and Jamal felt every nerve in his body sit up at once. "Good morning," she said, rolling toward the table. Her voice was the same as it had been every morning for 4 years, warm, even professional. Nothing in it suggested that anything had happened the day before. Nothing in it suggested that he had asked her point blank why she was still here, and she had told him point blank that it wasn't her job to answer. "Morning, Elle," Ben chirped. "Morning, sir." She nodded at Ben with great seriousness the way she always did, and Ben grinned. "Dad made pancakes." She raised one eyebrow. "Did he now?" "They're not great," Ben added helpfully. "I'm sure they're wonderful." "They're not," said Jamal, sliding a plate in front of her. "But they're an apology." Her eyes flicked up to his, just for a second. Then she looked at the plate. "For what exactly?" He swallowed. "For 4 years of letting you do it." The kitchen went very still. Ben, sensing something in the air the way kids do, looked from his father to Ella and back again, and then, very wisely, shoved an entire pancake into his mouth. Ella picked up her fork. Her hand, he noticed, was perfectly steady. "That's a lot of pancakes you owe me, Jamal." "I know. You'd better get good at making them." "I will." She took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "They're terrible," she said calmly. "I know. Truly, the worst pancakes I've ever eaten. I'll do better." She set her fork down. And for the first time since she'd rolled into the room for the first time maybe in days, she looked at him, really looked, through her glasses across the table with those tea-colored eyes that he had somehow missed for 4 entire years. "Jamal," she said quietly, We are not having this conversation in front of your son. No, ma'am. Eat your pancakes. Yes, ma'am. And Ben, mouth still full, glanced between them with the slow, dawning expression of a child who has just realized that the grown-ups in his life have been keeping a very large secret and that he has just somehow witnessed the lid coming off the box. Jamal didn't go to the office that morning. He'd run his own contracting business for 26 years, and one of the perks of being the boss, he'd told himself for 2.5 decades, was that you could call your foreman and say, "Handle it today." Eddie and Eddie would handle it. Today he called Eddie. Eddie handled it, and then he sat in the driveway in his truck for 45 minutes with his hands on the wheel and tried to figure out what a man does on the first day of the rest of his life. His phone buzzed. Hattie. Did you sleep? He typed back. No. Good, she wrote. Coffee. My porch. 20 minutes. He went. Hattie was already in her rocking chair with 2 mugs on the little wicker table between them, wearing a robe over her clothes because the morning was still cold. She didn't say hello. She just pointed at the empty chair and waited until he sat down. Talk. I haven't told her. I figured she'd be glowing. Hattie. Don't Hattie me. You had all night. You had a whole house dark and quiet, and a woman 3 rooms away who has been waiting for you for the better part of half a decade, and you didn't tell her. It didn't feel right. Oh, it didn't feel right. Hattie blew on her coffee. Honey, let me tell you something about feel right. Feel right is what gets people to the end of their lives sitting on a porch alone, wondering why they didn't say the thing when they had the chance. Feel right is the most dangerous lie a person tells themselves. I don't want to hurt her. You've been hurting her for 4 years. He flinched. She softened. A little. Jamal. Listen to me. That woman in your kitchen is not some 25-year-old who's going to swoon if you bring her flowers. She's a grown woman. A CEO. She's been hurt before by life, by that wheelchair, by whatever put her in it, by men, by everything. She is not interested in your panic. She is not interested in your guilt. What she is interested in, what she has always been interested in, if I read her right, and I do, is whether you are a man who can show up, day after day, without grand speeches, without being rescued by the moment. Then what do? You show up. That's it. That's it. Today, tomorrow, next week. Make the pancakes, sign the field trip slip yourself, ask her how her day was, and listen to the answer. Don't make it about you. Don't make it a production. And one of these days, when she trusts that this isn't a panic attack you're going to come out of in 2 weeks, you'll know. And so will she. He sat with that for a long time. Hattie. Why are you helping me? She took a slow sip of her coffee. Because 38 years ago, she said, a man very much like you sat on a porch like this one and said almost exactly what you just said. And the woman who told him to show up, that was his mother. And he listened. And we got 38 years out of it. And when he died, I didn't have a single regret about the showing up part. She looked at him sideways. I have a lot of regrets, Jamal. That is not one of them. Don't make it one of yours. He came home at noon with 2 grocery bags and a small spiral notebook from the drugstore. Ella was in her office down the hall on a call. He could hear her voice through the cracked door, sharp and decisive. He didn't interrupt. He carried the bags into the kitchen and started unpacking. When she rolled out an hour later, the kitchen smelled like garlic and butter, and there was a list on the counter in his blocky construction foreman handwriting. She read it without picking it up. Field trip slip Monday. Dad signs. Dishwasher repair, Tuesday, 10 a.m., Dad home. Ben dentist next Thursday. Dad takes. Groceries, Saturdays Dad. Trash night, Sundays, Dad. She didn't say anything. She rolled to the counter, picked up the list, read it again. Jamal. Yeah. What is this? It's a list. I see that. Of things I should have been doing. She set the list down very carefully. You don't have to do this. I know. You're not firing me from these things. He turned from the stove to face her, wooden spoon in his hand. "Ella," he said, "I am not firing you from anything. I am asking please for the privilege of being the father of my own son." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What's for lunch?" "Pasta, not from a box." "Big day." "Big week, I think." She almost smiled. "All right, Jamal," she said. "Make me lunch." That evening, Ben had a soccer practice across town, and Jamal drove him for the first time in 8 months. Ella usually took him. Ella had a van with a lift. Jamal had simply gotten used to the convenience. On the drive, Ben was quiet in the back seat, and Jamal kept glancing at him in the mirror. "You okay back there?" "Yeah." "You sure?" "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." "Is Ella going to leave?" The truck slowed almost on its own. "What makes you ask that? You're doing all the stuff she does. And on TV, when somebody starts doing somebody else's stuff, it's because the other person is leaving." Jamal took a long, slow breath through his nose. "Ben, listen to me. Ella is not going anywhere. Not because of me. Not because of you. I'm doing this stuff because I should have been doing it all along. Not because she's leaving. Because I want to be a better dad. Okay. Okay. You believe me? Mostly. Mostly's fair." The boy was quiet again for almost a mile. And then in the small, careful voice 8-year-olds use when they're saying something they think might be too big for them. "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you love her?" The truck didn't slow this time. It just kept going down the road. Headlights cutting through the early dusk, because Jamal Rudd had decided that he was done lying to himself, to his neighbor, to the woman in his kitchen, and most of all to the small person in his back seat. "Yeah, buddy, I think I do." "Does she know?" "Not yet." "Are you going to tell her?" "When the time's right." "Dad?" "Yeah." "That's what people say when they're scared." Jamal laughed. He couldn't help it. It came out of him in a kind of cracked, surprised bark. "You are too smart for your own good, you know that." "Yeah," said Ben. "Ella says that." When they got home at 8:30, the house smelled like soup. Ella had made dinner, old habit hard to break in one day, and the table was set for 3. She didn't comment on Jamal's lunch or the list on the counter. She asked Ben about practice. She listened. She made him laugh twice, once at a joke about the goalie, once at something Jamal didn't catch. Jamal watched her across the table and thought, "How did I look at this woman every night for 4 years and miss this?" After Ben went up to bed after the dishes were done, Jamal washing Ella, drying with a dish towel on her lap, the way they'd done 100 times before, except this time he kept catching himself, looking at her hands. She rolled back from the sink and said, "Walk me to the office. I left my laptop." "Sure." He walked her down the hall. Slow. The wheels of her chair were almost silent on the wood floors. Hers was the room at the back of the house, the one that used to be a guest bedroom, before he'd had it remodeled, with a wider doorway and a lower desk and a window that looked out over the back garden. He'd done that work himself 2 years ago on a long weekend, and at the time he had told himself it was just because she was a good employee and she deserved a proper office. He had been such an idiot. She rolled in and he stood in the doorway. She picked up the laptop from the desk and set it on her lap. Then she paused. "Jamal." "Yeah." "Come in for a second. Close the door." His heart kicked once hard against his ribs. He came in. He closed the door. She turned the chair so she was facing him. "This morning," she said. "The pancakes, the list, the—" She gestured vaguely at the air around them. "All of it." "Yeah?" "What is this?" He opened his mouth to give her the speech. The big one. The one he'd been writing in his head all day, in the truck and in the grocery store and on Hattie's porch. "Ella, I have been blind for 4 years, and I am sorry, and I love you, and—" He closed his mouth. He thought about Hattie. Don't make it a production. "It's me," he said, "trying to be the kind of man who deserves to be in the same house with you." She went very still. "Don't say that," she said quietly. "Why not?" "Because if you say things like that and you don't mean them, I will not survive it. Do you understand me, Jamal?" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "I have built a life. I have built a company. I have spent 22 years learning how to live in this body and run a board meeting in the same afternoon. I have been underestimated by every man I have ever met in a professional room, including sometimes you. I am fine. I do not need you to rescue me." "I know you don't. Then what do you need from me?" "Nothing." She blinked. "Nothing. Ella?" He took one step closer, just one. He stayed in the doorway. He did not crowd her. "I am not here to ask you for anything. Not tonight. I am here to tell you that for 4 years you have been giving and giving and giving in this house, and I am going to spend whatever time it takes, months, a year, the rest of my life, proving to you that I noticed. That's it. That's the whole thing. There is no speech tonight. There is no moment. I am putting myself on notice, in front of you, so you can hold me to it." She looked at him for a long, long time. And then, very slowly, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk and pressed the heels of her hands against her closed eyes. "Oh, Jamal," she whispered. He didn't move. "You are going to be," she said into her hands, "so much harder to say no to than I thought you'd be." His heart did something strange in his chest. Not a leap, a settling. Like something that had been crooked for a long time finally clicking into place. "You don't have to say anything tonight," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I see what's been in front of me. I'm sorry it took so long." She lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry, but only just. She put her glasses back on with great care. "Go to bed, Jamal." "Okay. And tomorrow, you're going to make breakfast." "Yes, ma'am." "Better pancakes." "I'll work on it." He stepped out into the hall and pulled the door shut behind him, and stood there for a second in the dark hallway, with his hand still on the knob, listening to nothing this time. No humming. Just the soft sound of her breathing on the other side of the door, slow and uneven, like a woman who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and had just been told that she was allowed possibly to set part of it down. He walked upstairs. He passed Ben's room door open, nightlight on the boy, a small shape under the comforter. He stopped. Watched him sleep for a moment. Thought about how this child, his child, their child, in every way that mattered for 4 years, had asked him in the truck if he loved her, and how he had said yes without flinching for the first time in his entire adult life. He went into his own room. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at the framed picture on the dresser, the one of his late wife smiling at a barbecue years ago, and he picked it up and he held it in his hands for a long time. "Marcus," he said softly, "I think I'm going to be okay." He set the picture back down, but he turned it slightly, just slightly, so that it faced the window now instead of the bed, and then he lay down, and for the first time in 5 years, Jamal Rudd slept the whole night through. He woke up at 6:15, and for one disoriented second, he didn't know where he was, because the light was different, and then he realized it was different, because he had slept through the whole night, and he was seeing the room the way it looked at dawn instead of 3 in the morning. He sat up slowly, ran a hand over his face, felt the unfamiliar shape of rest in his bones, and then he remembered the pancakes. He was downstairs in 7 minutes, flat hair still damp from a quick shower, sleeves of his flannel shirt rolled to the elbow, and he was already cracking eggs into a bowl when he heard the soft sound of wheels in the hallway behind him. "You're up early?" Ella said. "I'm making breakfast." She didn't roll into the kitchen. She stayed in the doorway. He could feel her there the way you feel weather change in a room. "You don't have to stand guard," he said over his shoulder. "I'm not going to burn the house down." "I'm not standing guard. I'm watching." "For what?" "For whether it lasts past Tuesday." He laughed. He couldn't help it. He turned around with the whisk still in his hand and looked at her sitting in the doorway in a soft gray sweater and no glasses, yet her hair still loose from sleeping, and he thought, "Good Lord, woman, you don't make this easy." That's fair, he said. It is fair. Tuesday's the dishwasher repair. I know. I'll be here. We'll see. Ella. Jamal. I'll be here. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she rolled into the kitchen and went to the coffee pot, and she poured herself a cup, and she said without turning around, "If you burn the eggs, I'm taking back the laundry. Deal." That was how the next 2 weeks went. Not in big speeches, not in declarations. He didn't tell her again that he loved her. He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't bring her flowers because he knew without anyone needing to tell him that flowers from a man 2 weeks past a breakup to a woman who had been waiting 4 years would feel like an insult dressed up in cellophane. What he did was show up. He drove Ben to school in the mornings. He picked him up in the afternoons. He learned badly at first, and then less badly how to braid the rope handle on Ben's lunchbox so it wouldn't fall apart in his backpack, a thing Ella had been doing every Sunday night for 4 years, and that he had never not once noticed. He sat at the table with his son and helped with math homework and discovered that he was much worse at 4th grade fractions than he remembered being. And Ben took great delight in correcting him. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door, a thing that had been squeaking Ella mentioned offhandedly one evening for 7 months. He apologized for the 7 months. She told him he was being dramatic. He fixed it anyway, and every night after Ben was in bed and the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, he and Ella would end up in the same room. The living room, usually her with her laptop, him with a book or the news, and they would sit there in a silence that was no longer the silence of a man and his employee, and not yet the silence of a man and his wife, but something in between, something gentler, something new. On the 8th night of that 2 weeks, she looked up from her laptop and said, "Jamal." "Yeah." "Why did you marry Marcus?" He blinked. He hadn't been expecting his late wife's name, not from Ella, not casually. "Why are you asking?" "Because I realized last week that I have lived in this house for 4 years, and I have never asked you a single question about her, and that seems wrong. I'd like to know, if you'll tell me." He set his book down. "She was a force of nature," he said slowly. She walked into a room and the temperature changed. I met her at a barbecue at my cousin's house and I got the meat wrong on the grill, and she came over and commandeered the whole operation, and I just stood there holding the tongs and watching her, and I thought, well, there she is. That fast. That fast. And then 23 good years, a son, a house, a life, and then 4 months from the diagnosis to the funeral. "I'm sorry." "Me too." She didn't push. She didn't say, "And how did you survive it?" or "What was the hardest part?" or any of the questions people asked when they wanted to be near a tragedy without actually touching it. She just nodded once slowly and went back to her laptop. But after a long minute without looking up, she said, "I don't want you to think you have to put her away." "What?" "Marcus, the pictures, she gestured vaguely. "Whatever it is people do, don't put her away on my account, Jamal. She belongs in this house. She built this house. She and you. I am not in the business of erasing women." He couldn't speak for a second. When he could, he said, "I turned her picture toward the window." "What?" "In my bedroom. The night we talked in your office. I turned her picture so it was facing the window instead of the bed. That was as much as I could manage." She lowered her laptop. "Jamal." "Yeah." "Turn it back." "What?" "Turn it back. Tonight. I'm not asking. Turn the picture back. She gets to look at the room. She earned it." He went upstairs 10 minutes later and turned it back and stood there in front of the dresser for a long time, looking at his late wife's smiling face, and he said out loud, "Marcus, you would have liked her. I think you would have liked her a lot." When he came back downstairs, Ella didn't ask if he'd done it. She knew. Tuesday came, and Jamal was home for the dishwasher repair. The repair guy turned out to be a chatty fellow in his 60s named Phil who'd been doing dishwashers in this town for 31 years and who took one look at Jamal, a black man in his 50s, standing in his own kitchen on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee and said, "You must be Mr. Rudd. Miss Ella talks about you." Jamal nearly choked. Does she now? Oh, sure. Calls me twice a year for this dishwasher. Always tells me what's going on with the boy. Real proud of him. Yeah. Says he's gonna be an astronaut. He's been saying that since he was 4. Well, she's the one telling it like it's already settled. Phil bent down to look at the dishwasher and didn't notice that Jamal had sat down at the kitchen table because his knees had stopped working for a second. Ella had been talking about Ben, proud of Ben, bragging about Ben to a dishwasher repairman she saw twice a year for years. Like Ben was hers. Like the boy was hers in some quiet, unspoken, unclaimed way that she had never put into words but had been carrying around with her every single day into rooms where Jamal himself was nowhere to be found. When Phil left, Jamal walked down the hall to her office. The door was open. She was on a call. He waited in the hallway until she finished, and then he stepped in. Phil's gone. Did he fix it? Yeah. Good. He told me you brag about Ben to him. She paused, just for a second. Phil exaggerates. Does he? She looked up at him slowly. Sometimes, she said carefully. When you spend a lot of time with a child who isn't biologically yours, you find yourself talking about him to strangers because the strangers are the only people who don't think it's strange. Ella. Yes. You don't have to call him biologically not yours. She set down her pen. What are you saying, Jamal? I'm saying he calls you Elle. I'm saying he asked me last week in the truck if you were going to leave, and when I told him no, he was relieved in a way no 8-year-old should be relieved about a housekeeper. I'm saying you are the second voice he hears every morning of his life, and you have been for 4 years. I'm saying you know what I'm saying. She was quiet for a long time. Jamal, she said finally, you are moving very, very fast for a man who 2 weeks ago could not pour a bowl of cereal without supervision. I know. Slow down. I will. I mean it. I know you do. Good. Now get out of my office. I have a board call in 10 minutes. He grinned. Yes, ma'am. He went. But on his way out, he heard her laugh, short and surprised, like the laugh had escaped her before she could catch it, and he carried that sound around with him for the rest of the afternoon, like a man carrying a candle through a windy night, cupping it with both hands. Hattie came over for coffee on Saturday morning, ostensibly to return a casserole dish, actually to inspect the situation. She found Jamal at the kitchen sink scrubbing a pan, and Ella at the table with a pile of papers that appeared to be quarterly reports. Hattie sat down, accepted a cup of coffee, looked at Jamal, looked at Ella, looked at Jamal again. She said. Jamal froze with the sponge in his hand. Hattie, don't. I didn't say anything. You said, is not a sentence. From you is a speech. Ella looked up from her papers, mildly amused. Are you two going to do this in front of me? Yes, said Hattie. No, said Jamal. Yes, said Hattie, again more firmly. She turned to Ella. Honey, how is he doing? How is he doing at what, Hattie? At being the kind of man who deserves to be in the same house with you. The kitchen went very still. Ella set down her pen. She looked at Hattie. She looked at Jamal, who had turned bright red under his beard and was studiously scrubbing a pan that had been clean for several minutes. Then she looked back at Hattie and said with a perfectly straight face, He's coming along. Hattie nodded once, satisfied. That's all I needed to know. You are a menace, Hattie, Jamal said, without turning around. I'm the village Jamal. There's a difference. She finished her coffee. She got up. She kissed Ella on top of the head, startling Ella so much that her glasses slid down her nose and she let herself out the back door, and she was halfway across the yard before either of them moved. Ella adjusted her glasses. Did your neighbor just kiss me on the head? She did. Is that a thing she does? Not previously, no. She's a lot. Hattie's a lot. Hattie is the only reason you and I are speaking right now, Jamal Rudd. Don't you take the Lord's name in vain about her. No, ma'am. She went back to her papers. He went back to his pan. and somewhere in the back of his chest the candle he had been carrying since Tuesday flickered just a little brighter. On the Sunday of the third week, it rained. Not a polite spring rain, a full sideways sky-opening Carolina downpour that turned the gutters into rivers and the driveway into a lake. Jamal was at the hardware store when it started, and by the time he got home, he was wet through to the bone, his truck nearly hydroplaning the last quarter mile. He pulled into the driveway and saw Ella's van parked at an angle near the front walk, not in its usual spot. The lift was extended. The door was open, in the rain. He killed the engine and was out of the truck before he'd finished thinking about it, sprinting across the lawn, his work boots slipping on the wet grass. Ella. She was halfway up the walk. Her chair had stalled, one of the front wheels had caught in the gap between two flagstones, and she was leaning forward trying to free it, and her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her sweater was so wet it was nearly black, and she was furious. Not scared, not crying, just deeply, biblically furious in the way of a woman who had built an empire and would not be defeated by a flagstone. "Don't," she said as he came up. "Don't you dare." "Don't what?" "Don't rescue me. I have it." "Ella, you're soaking wet." "I am aware, Jamal. I'm soaking wet, and it's not the rain. It's the driveway. It's this stupid chair. It's—" She broke off, glared up at him. Water ran down her face. "Step back. Give me 3 feet. I will get myself up this walk." "Okay. I mean it. I know." He stepped back. He stood there in the pouring rain 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, soaked to the skin himself, and watched her work the wheel free of the flagstone. It took her almost a full minute. She did it. She rolled past him without looking at him, and up the ramp he had built 2 summers ago, and she opened the front door, and she went inside. He stood in the rain a second longer. Then he followed her. He found her in the front hall. She had stopped just inside the door. Water was pooling around her chair on the hardwood. Her shoulders were shaking, not crying, he realized as he came closer. Just cold, bone cold, the kind of cold that came from a body that didn't regulate temperature the way it used to. "Ella, don't." "Honey, you're freezing." "Don't honey me." "Okay." He crouched down in front of her chair, slowly, carefully, the way a man approaches a wild animal that is also somehow his entire world. "Ella, look at me." She didn't. "Look at me, please." She looked. Her eyes were enormous behind her wet glasses, furious, embarrassed, proud, and under all 3 of those things terrified. Not of him, of what he'd just seen, of being seen needing. "I'm not going to lift you," he said quietly. "I'm not going to wheel you. I'm not going to do a single thing without you telling me to do it. But you are wet, and you are cold, and your fingers are blue, and I would like very much to bring you a towel and a dry sweater. Will you let me do that?" She didn't speak. She nodded once. He stood up. He went to the linen closet. He came back with the biggest, softest towel in the house, and one of his own sweaters, old gray cashmere, a Christmas gift from Marcus a decade ago. One of the few things he'd kept that still smelled faintly like cedar in time. He handed both to her. He turned his back so she could change. He heard the wet sweater hit the floor. He heard the dry one go on. He heard her exhale a long, shuddering breath, and he closed his eyes against the sound, because it was the sound of a proud woman letting a single inch of her armor down, and he knew the way you know things in your bones, that he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that 1 inch. "Okay," she said behind him. He turned. She was wrapped in his sweater. It was huge on her. The sleeves swallowed her hands. Her hair was still wet, but she had toweled it off and pushed it back from her face, and her glasses were on the table beside her, fogged. "You're shivering," he said. "I noticed." "Tea." "Please." He went to the kitchen. He put the kettle on. He stood there at the counter for a second, with both hands flat on it, and he closed his eyes and he breathed. She was in his sweater. She was alive and she was furious, and she was in his sweater and she had let him hand it to her. When the kettle whistled, he made the tea, the way he'd seen her make it 1,000 times strong with milk and just a little honey, and he carried it into the living room where she had rolled herself in front of the fireplace. "I didn't light a fire," she said. "I couldn't reach the matches." "I'll do it." He lit the fire. He handed her the tea. He sat down on the floor like a teenager beside her chair, with his back against the couch and his knees up and his own wet shirt sticking to him. They didn't speak for a long time. The fire popped. The rain hammered the windows. And then she said very quietly, "I should not have driven home in that. I knew the storm was coming. I thought I had time." "Why'd you risk it?" "Because Ben had a cough this morning, and I wanted to be home before he came back from his sleepover." Jamal closed his eyes. "Ella." "What?" "You drove home in a flood because my son had a cough." "He's not just your son, Jamal." The words hit him in the middle of the chest like a soft, slow punch. He turned his head. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the fire. Her hands were wrapped around the mug. The sleeves of his sweater were past her knuckles. "Say that again," he said very quietly. "No." "Ella." "I said it once. It counts. I'm not saying it twice in one night." He laughed, a broken, helpless little laugh, and he leaned his head back against the couch and looked up at the ceiling, and he said to the ceiling, to the fire, to the woman beside him, who had just driven through a storm because of a child's cough, Okay, once is enough, once is plenty." Her hand came down off the armrest of her chair. It rested on top of his shoulder. Just rested, light and cold from the mug, and a little unsteady. He didn't reach up. He didn't move. He just sat there on the floor in front of the fire with this woman's hand on his shoulder, and he thought clearly, calmly, with the kind of certainty a man only gets a few times in his life. "I am home. After 5 years. I am home, and I didn't even have to leave the house to find it." The fire popped again. Outside the rain kept falling, and neither one of them moved for a very, very long time. She moved her hand away first, slowly, like a woman pulling back from the edge of something she wasn't yet ready to fall into. "I should change into dry pants," she said. Her voice had gone careful again. Even. The CEO voice, the armor going back on piece by piece in front of the fire. "Okay. And you should get out of that shirt before you catch pneumonia." "Okay. I'm going to go to my room." "Okay, Ella." She didn't move. He didn't push. After a long second, she rolled herself away from the fire down the hall to her bedroom on the first floor, the one she had moved into 2 years ago when her old apartment had become more trouble than it was worth. The one he had told himself at the time was temporary. He stayed on the floor in front of the fire for another full minute after her door clicked shut. Then he got up and he went upstairs and he changed his shirt and he sat on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands and noticed they were trembling slightly, and he did not know whether it was the cold or the woman or the sun's. Not just yours, Jamal. Probably all three. Ben came home at 6, dropped off by his friend's mom, his hair still damp from the rain, his backpack slung over one shoulder and a half-eaten lollipop in one hand. He came barreling through the front door and stopped dead in the front hall. "Why is everything wet?" There was a flood. "Inside. Outside. We tracked some in." "Where's Elle?" "In her room. She got caught in the rain." Ben's whole face changed. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, buddy. She's just changing." "Did she fall?" "No, she didn't fall. She just got soaked. That's all." Ben dropped his backpack on the floor, kicked off his shoes without untying them, a thing Ella had been telling him not to do for 4 years, and ran down the hall to her room. He didn't knock. Jamal heard the door open, and the boy's voice breathless and worried. "LL, are you okay?" And then her voice low and warm, and instantly soothing. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Come here, your hair is wet. Did Mrs. Patterson not give you a hat?" And Jamal stood in the front hall, holding his son's abandoned backpack, and listened to the woman in the bedroom down the hall scold his child about a hat, and ask automatically like it was the most natural question in the world, "Did your mother?" and catch herself and correct herself? Did Mrs. Patterson? And his throat closed up so hard he had to brace one hand against the wall. She had almost said your mother, not Marcus, not the woman on the dresser upstairs, herself. She had caught it. She had pulled it back. But she had almost said it, and she had said it almost without thinking. And Jamal Rudd, 56 years old, contractor, widower idiot, stood in his own front hallway and understood with a kind of slow, sweeping clarity that the woman down the hall had been a mother to his child for at least 3 of the 4 years she'd been in this house and had never once asked him to call her one. He sat down on the bench by the front door. He pressed his hands against his eyes. He did not cry. He hadn't cried since the funeral, but his shoulders shook a little, and he sat there for a long minute, and when he stood up again, he was a different man than the one who had sat down. Cleaner somehow, quieter inside. He went to make dinner. That night, Ben was extra clingy. He wanted Ella to read his bedtime story instead of his father, and Jamal, who 2 months ago might have been hurt by that, said, "Of course, buddy, I'll come up after." He sat on the stairs while she read. He could hear her voice through the half-open door, the same tuneless, warm cadence she hummed when she folded laundry, only with words now doing all the voices, the wolf and the grandmother and the little girl and Ben, laughing in the way only an exhausted, safe child laughs. When she came out 40 minutes later, Jamal was still on the stairs. She rolled to a stop at the top of the stairs, the lift he had installed for her when she'd first moved into the first-floor room. Another thing he'd told himself was just practical, and she looked down at him. "He's asleep." "Thank you." "He wanted his—" She stopped. "His what?" "Nothing. Ella. He wanted his Ella story. He has favorites. He calls them that." Jamal stood up. Slowly. He didn't move closer to her. They were level now, eye to eye with him on the top step, and her in the chair. But he looked at her with everything he had, and he said, "He has Ella stories." "He has Ella stories. For how long?" 2.5 years. 2.5 years. "Jamal. And you didn't tell me. You didn't ask." The words hung there between them, soft and deadly. He didn't argue with them. He couldn't. They were true. "You're right," he said. "I didn't ask. I'm not throwing it at you. You are, a little, and you should. I'm tired, Jamal. I'm tired. Yeah. I'm going to bed." "Okay." She started to roll past him toward the lift. She paused. "Jamal." "Yeah." The rain stopped. "Yeah, I noticed. Tomorrow's supposed to be clear." "That's good. Take your son to the lake. You haven't taken him in a year." "How do you know I haven't taken him in a year?" She looked at him over her shoulder. "Because I take him. Every 6 weeks. Last time was 8 days ago. He hasn't been with you since the spring after Marcus died." He felt the floor tilt under him a little. "I'll take him tomorrow." "Good. Will you come?" She paused on the lift. She didn't turn around. "No." "Ella, he needs a day with his father, not with both of us. Take him, Jamal. Just the 2 of you. I have work." "Okay. Good night." "Good night." The lift hummed to life and carried her down to the first floor, and Jamal stood at the top of the stairs and watched her go, and he understood not for the first time, but more clearly than ever, that this woman was not going to make any of this easy for him. She was not going to fall into his arms because he had finally said the words out loud. She was going to make him earn every step, every conversation, every inch of ground. And he understood also for the first time that he was glad. Because a love that came easy after 4 years of not seeing wouldn't have been worth a damn thing. He took Ben to the lake the next morning. It was the kind of clear, cool spring day that comes after a storm when the whole world looks freshly washed. They threw rocks. They ate hot dogs from a roadside stand. Ben caught a small bass and was so proud of it, he made his father take 14 pictures. Around 2 in the afternoon, sitting on the dock with their feet in the water, Ben said, Dad? Yeah. Did you tell her yet? Jamal didn't pretend not to know what he meant. Not in those words. Why not? Because she deserves better than a man who just blurts it out. Ben thought about that. That's dumb, he said. You think so? Yeah, I tell Elle I love her every day. She tells me every day. We don't make a big deal about it. We just say it. Jamal looked at his son. You tell her you love her every day. Yeah. Since when? Since forever, Dad. The water lapped quietly against the dock. Buddy. Jamal said, your dad is a slow learner. I know. You know, Mom used to say it. She said your dad is the slowest, sweetest, dumbest learner I ever met, and that's why I love him. Jamal stared at him. She said that? Yeah, lots of times. You remember her saying that? I remember some stuff. The lake kept going about its business. Somewhere a boat horn sounded. A heron lifted off the far shore. Jamal reached over and put his hand on the back of his son's neck, and he squeezed gently, and Ben leaned into it the way he had been leaning into things since he was a baby. And Jamal Rudd thought Marcus, I am going to do right by him. I am going to do right by both of them. I swear it. When they got home that evening, Ella was at the kitchen table, but she wasn't on her laptop. She was reading a book, an actual book, paperback, worn at the spine. He hadn't seen her read for pleasure, and he wasn't sure he'd ever seen her read for pleasure. Hey, he said. She looked up. Hey, how was the lake? Good. Caught a bass. It was really good, Ella. Thank you. You don't thank me for telling you to spend time with your son. I do, actually. She didn't argue. She marked her place in the book and set it down. Ben dropped his tackle box on the floor, thunk, and held up his phone. Elle, I got a picture. Look. She looked. She made all the right noises. She told him the bass was a record setter. He beamed. Go shower, she said. You smell like fish and lake water and small boy. That's 3 of my best things, Ben said cheerfully, and he ran upstairs. Jamal sat down across from her at the table. He did not pick up his book. He did not turn on his phone. He just sat there looking at her in the kitchen where 2.5 weeks ago he had slammed his fist on the counter and watched the coffee bleed across the morning paper. What are you reading? She turned the book so he could see the cover. Some thick paperback novel. Sweeping, dramatic, the kind with raised gold letters on the front. Trash, she said. The good kind. I didn't know you read trash. There is a great deal you don't know about me, Jamal. I know. I'd like to fix that. She looked at him over the top of the book. Slowly, Jamal. Slowly. I mean it. I know. I'm not pushing. I'd like to know what you read, and what music you actually like, and what that song is you hum when you fold laundry. I've been wondering for 4 years. She blinked. You've been wondering what the humming song is? Yes. Jamal. What? It's not a song. What? It's not a song. It's something my mother used to hum. She didn't know any songs. She made it up. I don't think it has a name. I don't think there are notes. When I'm calm, when I'm doing something with my hands, I hum what she hummed. I have done this since I was 8. I didn't even know I did it until I was 20. Your mother? Yes. Tell me about her. Ella set the book down. She was a seamstress in Camden, New Jersey. She had 4 kids. I was the youngest. She raised us alone after my father died heart attack 51 like that. She snapped her fingers softly. And she sent all 4 of us to college on a seamstress's wages, and she died 11 years ago of a stroke without ever once in her entire life telling any of us that she was proud of us, because she didn't have to. We knew. Jamal was quiet. That's why I hum it, she said. When I'm taking care of someone, it makes me feel like she's in the room. Ella. What? You take care of Ben. I do. And you hum. I do. So your mother is in the room with him. She swallowed. Sometimes, she said. Yes, I'd like to think so. He reached across the table. He didn't take her hand. He just laid his own hand palm up on the wood between them. An offer. A thing she could take or not take. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she put her hand in his. It was small. The fingers were cool. There was a callus on her thumb from typing, and a thin silver ring on her index finger he'd never noticed. He didn't squeeze. He didn't pull. He just held it. I'm sorry I didn't ask about your mother for 4 years, he said. You're asking now. That's not the same. No, it's not. But it's something. Ella. I want to take you to dinner. She raised an eyebrow. On a date. What else would I take you on? You haven't been on a date with someone you actually liked in 5 years, Jamal. You're rusty. I'm aware. And I am not Sarah. I am not a stop on a tour. I am not a try and see. If you take me to dinner, you take me to dinner because you mean to keep doing it. Are you clear on that? Crystal? Good. Friday. Friday. I'll find a sitter for Ben. Hattie will do it. She's already volunteered. Hattie's already... He started laughing. He couldn't help it. How long has Hattie known about Friday? Since I told her about a week ago that I'd say yes if you ever asked. Ella. What? You are terrifying. Yes. I love you. It came out before he meant to say it. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't worked up to it. They were sitting at the kitchen table holding hands and talking about Hattie babysitting, and the words just walked out of his mouth like they'd been waiting at the door. The kitchen went very, very quiet. She didn't pull her hand back. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was barely a whisper, and it had something in it he had never heard before. Not the CEO, not the caregiver, not the woman in the wheelchair. Just her. Just Ella. Stripped down to the bones of herself. I know, she said. I've known for a long time. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry it took me this long. I know that too. Will you say it back someday? She thought about that, honestly. He could see her thinking. Yes, she said. But not tonight. Why not tonight? Because tonight, you are still the man who said it for the first time, and I want to remember what your face looked like when you said it without anything coming back at you. I want that memory, Jamal. I have earned it. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, really looked the way he should have been looking for 4 years, and he nodded. You've earned it, he said. I have. Take it. I am. She squeezed his hand. Once. Then she let go, and she picked up her book, and she opened it back to her place. But her face was different. He had never seen it before. She was, and he realized this only a long time later, lying in bed that night, replaying the moment over and over. She was smiling. Not on her mouth, in her eyes, behind the glasses. Quiet, steady. Like a fire that had been banked for a long time and had finally been allowed to flare. He sat across from her at the table for another hour while she read, not saying anything, not needing to. Ben came down in his pajamas and got a glass of water and went back upstairs. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. And Jamal Rudd, who at the start of this story had been a man slamming his fist on a counter while one woman walked out and another woman hummed in the next room, sat at his own kitchen table in a profound and unfamiliar peace, watching the woman he had loved for years. Finally out loud, read a paperback novel, and he understood that the rest of his life was going to look more or less like this. And it was going to be enough. It was going to be more than enough. It was going to be everything he had not known until 21 days ago that he had been waiting for. When she went to bed, she rolled past his chair on the way out of the kitchen, and she paused, and she put her hand briefly on the back of his neck, the way he had put his on Ben's at the lake, and she said very quietly, "Good night, Jamal." "Good night, Ella." She rolled away. He sat at the table for a long time after she was gone, and then he got up, and he turned out the light, and he went upstairs to bed, and he did not look at the picture on his dresser because he didn't need to anymore. Marcus knew. Marcus had always known. Probably before he did. Friday came faster than he expected. He had been a married man once, and a widower for 5 years, and he had forgotten completely. Forgotten what it felt like to stand in front of a closet at 6 in the evening with sweaty palms and absolutely no idea what to wear. He stood there for 15 minutes. He pulled out 3 shirts. He put 2 of them back. He pulled out the 3rd one again. He sat down on the bed. A small voice said from the doorway, "The blue one." Ben was leaning against the doorframe in his pajamas holding his iPad. "You think, she likes you in blue, she told Hattie." Jamal stared at his son. "When did she tell Hattie anything about what I look good in? They talk, Dad. They talk all the time. They have like coffee on Tuesdays." "Coffee on Tuesdays?" "Yeah." "How long has that been happening?" "Forever, Dad." Jamal lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. "Has the entire neighborhood been running my life behind my back?" "Yeah." "For how long?" "At least a year, maybe 2. Jamal started laughing, and once he started he couldn't stop, and Ben padded across the room and climbed up onto the bed beside him and laughed too, and they lay there for a minute, the 2 of them, on top of the comforter in the soft evening light, 2 boys who had once been very lost and were finding their way back. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy." "Don't mess this up. I'm gonna try real hard not to." "I mean it. I know you do. She's the only mom I remember." The laughter went out of Jamal like air from a tire. He turned his head on the pillow. His son was looking at the ceiling. His profile was small and serious and very much his mother's. "Ben." "Yeah." "You don't have to call her that. Not until you want to. Not unless you want to." "I know. And if you never want to, that's okay too." "I know, Dad." "Okay. Wear the blue one." He wore the blue one. Dove. She came out of her room at 7:15 in a soft black dress that she had clearly bought sometime during the week without telling him, with her hair pinned up off her neck and a small silver chain at her throat that he had never seen before. He forgot how to talk. "Stop it," she said. "I didn't say anything. You're staring." "I'm allowed." Hattie came clucking through the front door at 7:20 with a casserole dish in one hand and a deck of cards in the other, declared that she was taking Ben to Hattie's house, which means my rules, my TV, my ice cream, and bullied them both out of their own front door before Jamal had time to second-guess a single thing. He drove her to a small Italian place downtown. Not a chain, not a place he'd taken Sarah, not a place anyone they knew was likely to be on a Friday night, and the host knew him by name, because he'd built the man's deck 2 years back and had been promised a table any time he wanted it, and they were tucked into a quiet corner with a candle on the table inside of 15 minutes. She didn't open the menu right away. "Jamal." "Yeah." "This is the first real date I have been on in 9 years." He paused with his water glass halfway to his mouth. 9 years. 9 years. "Why?" "Because I am a 41-year-old disabled woman who runs a software company, and there is a very particular brand of man who decides he can fix me, and I got tired of meeting him." "Ella, I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it so you understand. I am here because you are not that man. I have been watching you for 4 years, Jamal. 4 years. And you have 100 faults. 100. I have a list, but fixing me is not one of them. You have never once treated me like a problem to be solved." He set the water glass down. "I didn't even treat you like a person to be seen," he said quietly, "for most of those 4 years. No. But when you finally did, you didn't try to change me. You just caught up, quietly. You started showing up. You stopped letting me carry the things you should have been carrying, and you didn't make a speech about it. You just did it. Do you know how rare that is in a man? I'm starting to." "It is very rare, Jamal." "Okay, so this dinner is not me deciding whether you're worth my time. I decided that a long time ago. This dinner is me letting you take me out properly because I am also 41 years old and I have earned a candle and a glass of wine and a man across the table who finally knows what he's looking at." He couldn't speak for a second. When he could, he picked up his menu and he said very seriously, "What looks good?" She laughed. Really laughed. Head tipped back, and a couple at the next table glanced over and smiled, and she said, "Don't you dare order for me Jamal Rudd. Wouldn't dream of it." They talked for 3 hours. He learned that she had a brother in Atlanta who was a pediatrician and a sister in Philadelphia, who refused to speak to either of them for reasons too tangled to explain in one dinner, and that her mother had taught her to sew before she could read. He learned that she had been in a car accident at 19. Not her fault. Drunk driver a Tuesday afternoon of all things. And that the first year in the chair had been a year she would not describe to him tonight, but maybe someday, if he was patient. He learned that she had built her company out of the spare bedroom of her apartment in 2014 with 2 engineers and a contract she had landed by cold calling a man who was now on her board. He told her things too. He told her about the first year after Marcus died, the year he didn't remember the year he had drunk. Through the year, his sister had finally come and shaken him by the shoulders in his own kitchen and said, "Your son still has one parent. Jamal, are you going to be it or am I taking him?" He told her about the night 3 weeks after the funeral when he had stood at the foot of Ben's bed at 2 in the morning and watched his son sleep and thought with absolute clarity, "I do not know how to do this without her." He told her that her arrival, 8 months later, calm, unfussy in a wheelchair, with a duffel bag on her lap, had felt at the time like a small mercy he didn't quite understand. "I understand it now," he said. "Took me 4 years. Do you remember what you said? Your first day. I said a lot of things, Jamal. You said, 'Mr. Rudd, I am not afraid of your grief, but I will not be wasted by it either.'" She smiled. "I did say that. I thought it was the rudest thing anyone had ever said to me in my own house. It was. And it was exactly what I needed. I know. That's why I said it." He shook his head slowly. "You were running my life from day one. Someone had to." He drove her home a little before 11. The neighborhood was quiet. Hattie's porch light was on, and through her front window, they could see Ben on the couch, asleep in front of the TV, a bowl of ice cream tipped over on the coffee table next to him. Jamal went in to get him. Hattie hushed him at the door and waved him on. He carried his son out across the lawn, the boy's head heavy on his shoulder, and brought him home and put him to bed in his clothes, because Ella, watching from the doorway, said, "Don't wake him. He's fine. He'll change in the morning." She rolled with him back down the hallway. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. "Jamal." "Yeah." "I had a good time tonight." "Yeah." "Yeah." "Me too." "Walk me to my room." He walked her to her room. At her door, she turned the chair so she was facing him, and she looked up at him for a long second and she said, "Lean down." His heart did the thing it had done the night Sarah walked out the kick hard against his ribs, but for an entirely different reason this time. He leaned down. She kissed him. It was a small kiss, closed-mouthed, brief. Her lips were warm and a little dry from the wine. Her hand came up and rested very briefly against his jaw, and her thumb brushed the corner of his mouth, and then she pulled back. "Good night, Jamal." "Good night, Ella." She rolled into her room. She did not close the door all the way. She left it open a few inches, not an invitation, not exactly. Just a small, quiet sign that said, "The wall between us is not what it was." He stood in the hallway for a long minute. Then he turned out the light and went upstairs. The next morning was Saturday. He woke up before the sun because old habits were hard to break, and he came downstairs in his sweatpants and a t-shirt and started a pot of coffee. He didn't expect her to be up. She rarely got up before 7 on a Saturday, but he heard the wheels in the hallway behind him at 6:20. "Jamal." "Hey. You're up early." "So are you." "I couldn't sleep." "Is everything—" "Everything is fine. I just couldn't sleep." She rolled to the table. He poured her a cup of coffee milk, just a little honey the way she made her tea, and set it in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it. She didn't drink it. She just looked at it for a long time, and then she said without looking up, "I love you." The kitchen went very still. He put down the coffee pot. He sat down at the table across from her. He did not speak. He waited, because he understood. Now finally understood after 4 years and 3 weeks that what this woman gave was given on her own terms, in her own time, and that the most important thing he could do, the only thing he could do, was not interrupt it. She kept looking at her coffee. "I have loved you," she said, for a long time. Probably from the night with the toast and the water, maybe before, I'm not sure. I stopped keeping track at a certain point because keeping track was painful and pointless, and I had a company to run. I told myself that I was here for Ben. That was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I was also here because the days felt better when you were in the same house. Even when you didn't see me. Even when you couldn't. And I told myself I would not say it out loud unless you said it first, because I am not in the business of putting my heart in a man's hand if he hasn't asked for it. You asked for it Thursday night at this table. So I am putting it there now. So she finally looked up. "That is what I should have said Thursday," she said. "I'm saying it now." He couldn't speak. He didn't try. He reached across the table. He took her hand. He kissed the back of it, the small callus on her thumb, the silver ring on her index finger, the cool fingers, and then he turned her hand over and kissed her palm, and he held it against his cheek for a long second, and he closed his eyes. "Ella. I am not going anywhere. I know. For the rest of my life. I know, Jamal. I am not asking you to marry me right now. I am not asking you to do anything right now. I am telling you. So that you know. And so that I know. Out loud. In this kitchen. Where everything good in my life has happened for the last 4 years and I was too dumb to see it. I know," she said again, softly. "Good. Good." She squeezed his hand. He let go. He stood up. He picked up the coffee pot and topped off both cups, and he sat back down, and they drank their coffee in the quiet of a Saturday morning kitchen, and somewhere upstairs, a small boy began to stir in his sleep. 6 months later, on a Sunday in October, Jamal Rudd married Ella Marsh in the backyard of the house on Linden Street, under the same maple tree where Marcus had once asked him 24 years earlier what he thought about painting the back fence blue. It was a small wedding. Hattie stood up for Ella. Jamal's sister stood up for Jamal. Ben, 9 years old now, growing fast, 2 inches taller than he'd been at the lake, walked Ella down the aisle they'd carved through the grass. He held the back of her chair as she rolled his small hand steady, his face very serious. And when the officiant asked who was giving this woman to be married, he said in a voice that cracked only a little, "I am. I'm her son." Nobody had told him to say it that way. Jamal cried, right there at the altar in front of God and Hattie and his sister and 23 other people. He cried, and he didn't try to hide it, and Ella reached up from her chair and wiped his face with her thumb, the way she had wiped Ben's face 1,000 times, and she said loud enough for the front row to hear, "You are the slowest, sweetest, dumbest learner I have ever met in my life, Jamal Rudd." And the whole crowd laughed, because most of them had heard the line before from Marcus years ago at a barbecue. A story everyone in the family knew. And Jamal laughed too, through the tears, and Ella said the words again. The words she had held in her mouth for 4 years before she said them out loud the first time, "I love you." And he said, "I love you too." And they were married. That night, after the last guest had gone home, and Ben was asleep upstairs in his suit pants, because he had refused to take them off, Jamal sat on the porch with his wife in the cool October dark, and he held her hand, and they did not speak for a long time. Eventually she said, "Jamal." "Yeah." "Do you remember the night Sarah left?" "I remember every minute of it. You came down the hall. You stood in the laundry room doorway. You watched me fold towels." I remember. What were you thinking? In that moment, the truth. He thought about it. I was thinking that the silence in the kitchen was the loudest thing I had ever heard, and that the only sound in the whole house that was making it bearable was you, humming, down the hall. And I was thinking, this is going to sound stupid, but it's true. I was thinking that woman has been in my house for 4 years, and I could not tell you what song she was humming. It wasn't a song. I know that now. Ella? Yes. I can tell you what it is now. What is it? It's your mother, in the room, watching over my son. She turned her head on the back of her chair and looked at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes did all of it. He squeezed her hand. The maple tree above them rustled in the wind. Somewhere down the block a dog barked, and somebody called the dog in for the night, and a porch light went out, and another came on, and the small, ordinary business of a neighborhood on a Sunday evening went on around them as it had always gone on. Jamal Rudd looked at the woman beside him, disabled. CEO, proud patient, terrifying kind. The second voice his son heard every morning of his life, and now the first voice he would hear every morning of his own. And he understood finally and forever the thing he had been too blind to understand for 4 entire years. The love of his life had not arrived. She had been in the next room the whole time. And he had finally learned to listen for the humming. He lifted her hand to his lips, and he kissed it, and he held it there, and he did not let it go for the rest of the night. He never let it go again.